It's Mother's Day, so happy day to all of you who are mothers or mother figures or who do the work of mothering. This is an American tradition thanks to the work of Anne Reeves Jarvis and her Mother's Day work clubs before and during the Civil War, and Unitarian Julia Ward Howe's call for a Mother's Day for peace, and then the lobbying of Anna Jarvis, daughter of Anne, for a National Mother's Day holiday on the second Sunday of May. That's much easier to track than Mother's Day in England, which when I was growing up, I knew as a church observance called Mothering Sunday. It falls on the fourth Sunday in Lent, so it's a movable feast and you have to do astronomy to figure out when it is. And as much as these two forms of Mother's Day might seem unrelated, the transformation of Mothering Sunday from a minor church holiday into a popular Mother's Day in England was actually inspired by transatlantic news of the efforts of Anna Jarvis here in the US. Now, Mothering Sunday as an English church holiday was for people to visit their mother church, usually the church in which they'd been baptized. It was also a day to take a welcome break from the austerity of Lent, with the baking of special sweets and the picking of flowers. Unfortunately, many of those traditions have been forgotten, and Mother's Day on both sides of the Atlantic has been thoroughly commercialized, something that Anna Jarvis disliked to the point that she was arrested for protesting the holiday that she'd created. So last year, we started our own UU Mother's Day tradition with a homecoming service. After all, I've met a number of UUs over the years who refer to the congregation where they first became a UU as their home church. But that would also apply to the congregation where someone had their child dedication or coming of age or bridging. Given that the second Sunday in May is much easier for most people to track than the fourth Sunday in Lent, and since grown-up children are often in town for Mother's Day, this would be our Sunday to celebrate the people who first became a UU here or who had one of those rites of passage as a child or youth. What's more, May 15th, tomorrow, is both the anniversary of our charter as a congregation in 1958 and the anniversary of the consolidation that formed the Unitarian Universalist Association in 1961. So this is a good time to celebrate this congregation, this faith, and those who have found it and grown up in it here too. Later in the service, we'll invite those of you who are willing to speak to come forward and say something about what this congregation means to you, whether you grew up here or had a child or grandchild who did, or if you're an RE teacher or an RE supporter, which really ought to be all of us, of course. Now, though, Joanne is going to light this array of chalices created by each of the coming of age classes over the last 15 years. In lighting these chalices, we hold in our hearts all those youth who have come of age here, and we open our hearts to all those children who will grow up and become youth here too. If you've spent a Sunday morning in our RE space recently, you'll know that there have been a lot of children. Even if you haven't spent a Sunday in RE, you've hopefully noticed that we've had a lot of newcomers, particularly families, recently. If you are one of those newcomers, please plan to come to our next Pathways to Membership program on June 10th. And yes, there'll be a program for children that morning too. It's certainly done good for my spirit to see children and new families here on Sunday mornings. It's a sign of our vitality. It's a measure of our potential. And it's an indication that our need for more building space hasn't changed. Even on those Sundays when the nursery isn't full of babies and toddlers and the classroom isn't full of children and teenagers and adult helpers, it stretches even Joanne's considerable creative abilities to come up with programs that are meaningful to both 4-year-olds and 14-year-olds in the same room. I know that my daughter, who is 10, would like to be with others her own age too. And our older teenage youth need a space that they can call their own. I know how important that is. So let me say something to all of our new families that I know some of our greeters and ushers have been saying, almost apologetically to newcomers. We know we don't have enough space for RE. We know we need more space for RE. We know that RE doesn't work very well or even at all on Zoom. We are actively looking for a new building with more space for RE. And that's something to which we as a congregation have committed ourselves on more than one occasion, because we know we would grow if we had more space, particularly more RE space. 4 years ago, for instance, about a third of the UUFP membership met to draft a vision for the UUFP's future. Given our mission to grow in wonder, connect in love, engage in service, and inspire generosity, we asked ourselves what the UUFP might look like in 5 or 10 years' time once we were living into that mission more fully. The intention of such a vision, by the way, is not to stand forever and for always, but to be updated, say every 5 years, to reflect that we're not the same congregation we were 5 years ago, because we've made progress in living into our mission. Not surprisingly, a large part of our 2019 vision concerned our need for better facilities, particularly more space. This had been on our minds for some years, and in fact was the reason we started working on our mission and vision and covenant and strategic plan in the first place. And the planning committee, the real estate task force, and others continued to work on that all through the pandemic. However, that's not all that our vision includes. It also includes social justice and visibility to the public, and staffing and spiritual development, and it names diversity and growth as being important, particularly when it comes to being more child-friendly and more teenager-friendly. As reported by the Planning Committee, following conversations with various people and groups, our vision is for every child, youth, parent, and other caring adult to work together to build their understanding of this religion and spread it to the world. That was written before the pandemic, but it's only become more vital since. Then, in the financial feasibility study conducted to predict the success of our capital campaign, which we had the nerve to do during the pandemic, stewardship consultant Mark Hewitt affirmed that RE is an important part of our UUFP's vision, that it's a big part of the reason why we need more space, and that it matters to you, the congregation. Mark also reported that we needed a plan for intentional growth in membership and diversity, rather than wishfully thinking that if we build it, they will come. And our vision for RE has got to be at the heart of that plan. So Joanne and Beck and I started a conversation with the Southern region to see if they could help with a plan for growth. We first met last summer, and we talked about the congregational covenant we were developing. So we agreed to meet again after the covenant was adopted. We did that, and by then we had our new strategic plan in place as well. One of the first objectives being to complete our congregational covenant, so we had something to check off almost immediately. Always a good idea with to-do lists. Still, it seemed that our conversation with the Southern region wasn't really going anywhere, perhaps because no other congregation had ever asked about a plan for growth before. Then I attended our fabulous Tidewater Cluster gathering in March and heard the Reverend Byron Tyler Coles speak. Tyler is on Southern Region staff, but they hadn't been part of our conversation about growth. Listening to Tyler speak at the cluster gathering, though, I realized that a plan for growth isn't actually what we need. And that's why we'd had a hard time talking about it. Now, regarding our strategic plan, the Southern Region had advised us that rather than talking about diversity, the plan should talk about inclusion. I agreed with this in that increased diversity will be a consequence of improved inclusion. We cannot work directly on diversity, short of dragging people in from the street, and that's called kidnapping. Rather, we can work on inclusion, which then leads to diversity. And then at the cluster meeting, Tyler made the point that relationships are more important than programs. That's when I realized that just as we should talk about inclusion rather than diversity, we should be talking about relationships rather than growth, in that growth will be a consequence of relationships. So I looked through our strategic plan to find objectives that are about developing and deepening relationships, and I found more than 20 of them. We already have our plan for growth, as it were, because developing and deepening relationships is already part of our strategic plan. Now we just need to do what we've said we're going to do. Lots of programs for adults, particularly those who didn't mind being on Zoom, came back pretty quickly as the pandemic went into its third year. Programs for children and families lagged behind as we expected they would, but now RE is getting busy and crowded again. We know that the diversity of our multi-generational community and our ministries to families are important to us, that they're such important parts of living into our mission because they are in our vision and they're in our strategic plan. So let's become the congregation that we say we want to be. And with all your help and support in the shared ministry that is religious exploration at the UUFP, I know that we will succeed. I'm going to ask you some wondering questions now, and I'll give you a little time after each to reflect. Pam, please put each question on the screen as I read it. I wonder how you have experienced the love that reaches across difference to make all things possible. I wonder what this congregation as your mother church means to you. I wonder how you imagine what a world there can be if we share, if we care. I wonder how you will help and support the shared ministry of religious exploration here at the UUFP. For our activity this morning, we have a responsive reading. It's by my colleague, the Reverend Leslie Takahashi, who serves the mission of the Mount Diablo UU Church in Walnut Creek, California, and is presently the president of the UU Ministers Association. Pam will put the words to this responsive reading on the screen. I'll read the lines in Roman type if you will all respond with the lines in italics. We bring into our hearts all those who have gone before us.
All those whose living in this world has prepared the soil for our living.
All those whose being has enabled our being.
Let us also remember those whose existence succeeded in our lives today.
Not only those who are our physical descendants,
but also those whose spirits inherit the love we sow, the hope we reap, the promise we harvest.
and may those of us whose religious inheritance is freedom never rest.
Until all who wish to be his children are sheltered.
We hold the past and future of our fellowship in our hands as we weave together the threads of time and love. We hold in our hearts all those babies and toddlers who were dedicated here, all those youth who have come of age, all those young adults who have bridged, and we open our hearts to all those children who will grow up, become youth, and become young adults here too. For all of our children, past and future, we hold the hope for a better world, for a more peaceful world, for a more loving world. Not a passive hope of sitting back and letting others make the world in their image, but an active hope of engagement and connection and service that grows the beloved community for everyone. For every child who is dedicated here, we promise to be their extended family. For every youth who comes of age here, we promise to support them through their teenage years. For everyone who bridges here, we promise to guide them into young adulthood. Our children may be the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself, but this does not diminish the importance of motherhood, of doing the work of mothering, whether as individual parents or as an extended family community. We also hold as rare gifts the vitality of this congregation, our potential to thrive as we grow in wonder, connect in love, engage in service, and inspire generosity together. We hold gratitude for all those who came before us, who prepared this community of faith for us, just as we prepare it for those who will come after us. For we have inherited a precious religious tradition of freedom and love, of wonder and covenant, and it calls us to be good and faithful stewards that we might pass the flame of our living tradition to younger generations. For there is such a need in our world, a need for compassion, a need for connection, and most of all, a need for hope, a need that we can fill if we but work together to share with all who hunger for this feast that is the spirit of life and love. May it be so.